As Julian's footsteps faded down the marble hallway, the lie he just told lingered in the air, thick and cloying like cheap perfume. His words about an urgent investor meeting had tasted like ash on his tongue, but the fear of what Serafina Dubois could unleash was a far more bitter poison. He clutched the keys to his Aston Martin, the cold metal a poor anchor in the swirling chaos of his mind. He told himself it was just a conversation, a final loose end to tie up. But he knew better. He'd always known better when it came to her. Serafina Dubois wasn't just a mistake in Julian's past. She was a hurricane he naively believed he'd survived. She wasn't a footnote, she was an entire chapter he had violently ripped out of his life story, foolishly thinking no one would notice the jagged edge left behind. The memories flooded back, unbidden and sharp. Not of sordid, clandestine meetings in sterile hotel rooms. No, their affair had been far more dangerous, far more beautiful than that. It had been sun-drenched afternoons in a private villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast, the scent of lemons and salt in the air. It was the thrill of her laughter, a wild, untamed sound that made him feel alive in a way his meticulously curated, gold-plated world never could. She wasn't just an escape from the pressures of his empire. She was a different reality altogether. She was a reckless, passionate artist who saw the world in vibrant, chaotic colors, while he saw it in spreadsheets and profit margins. She challenged him, provoked him, and made him feel a kind of freedom that was both exhilarating and terrifying. With Eleonora, life was a masterpiece of control and elegance. With Serafina, it was a beautiful, raging fire. And he, like a fool, had wanted to stand close enough to feel the warmth without getting burned. The end had been as brutal as the beginning was beautiful. It happened in a stark, minimalist suite in Geneva, the cold Swiss precision of the room a perfect backdrop for the clinical amputation he was about to perform. He had looked at her, this force of nature, and spoken the words he had rehearsed for days. "It's over, Serafina. It has to be." He remembered the look in her eyes, not just heartbreak, but a flash of something else. A flicker of disbelief that he could be so cowardly. He had promised her it was final, a clean break. He had sworn it to her, and then, more importantly, he had sworn it to Eleonora, who had confronted him not with screams, but with a composed dignity that had shattered him more than any rage ever could. He had promised his wife he would never, ever contact Serafina again. A promise forged in lies, made only to preserve the perfect facade of his life. Now, that promise was turning to dust. Back in the present, his phone vibrated against the polished wood of his desk. Her name glowed on the screen, a digital specter from a buried past. He let it ring twice, his heart hammering against his ribs. He answered, his voice a strained whisper. "What do you want?" "Julian," she said. Her voice was different. The wild energy was gone, replaced by a low, smooth tone laced with something that sounded like desperation. But he knew her well enough to detect the steel beneath it. "I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important." "This has to stop, we agreed," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the closed door of his study. "I know what we agreed," she replied, a hint of weariness in her voice. "Believe me, I know, but things have changed. I'm not asking for anything. I just need to talk to you. In person. Please, Julian, it's urgent." Urgent. The word hung in the air, a loaded threat disguised as a plea. What had changed? What could possibly be so urgent after all this time? Every instinct screamed at him to hang up, to block her number, to run. But the fear, that cold, slithering suspicion of what she knew, what she might do, was stronger. He was a man who controlled boardrooms and orchestrated billion-dollar deals. Yet the thought of this one woman, a ghost from his past, could reduce him to a panicked mess. The irony was suffocating. "Fine," he finally relented, the word tasting like defeat. "One meeting. That's it." He hung up, his palms slick with sweat. He took a deep breath, composing himself, slipping on the mask of the unflappable magnate before walking out to face his wife. The lie came easily, practiced and smooth. "Darling," he began, forcing a tone of weary frustration. "It's the Singapore investors. An emergency call. They're threatening to pull out of the new tower project. I have to go meet them. Right now." He watched her face for any sign of suspicion, any crack in her serene composure. But there was nothing, only a calm, almost sympathetic nod. "Of course, Julian. Handle it. Don't worry about me." Her calmness was the most unnerving thing in the world. It was too perfect, too understanding. A part of him, the part that wasn't consumed by panic, wondered why. Why wasn't she more upset? Why were there no questions? But he pushed the thought away. Her acceptance was a gift, a temporary reprieve he desperately needed. He kissed her cheek, the scent of her jasmine and bergamot perfume, a stark contrast to the stench of his own deceit, and walked out the door, feeling her eyes on his back every step of the way. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the placid mask on Eleonora's face dissolved. It didn't crumble into tears or contort in anger. No, it was replaced by an expression of cold, crystalline focus. She remained seated for a long moment, listening to the purr of his car fading into the distance. Then she rose. Her movements were not those of a heartbroken wife. They were deliberate, methodical, like a general moving pieces on a chessboard. She walked not to the window to watch him leave, but to the magnificent antique vanity that stood in the corner of their bedroom, the gift from him on their 5th anniversary. She sat on the velvet stool, her reflection staring back at her, poised, elegant, and utterly unreadable. Her long, slender fingers bypassed the diamond earrings and pearl necklaces. They went straight to the simple silver locket that rested against her collarbone, the one he had given her on their very first anniversary, engraved with the words, "My North Star." With a faint, metallic click, she opened it. But inside there was no smiling photograph of the two of them. There was no miniature portrait of their son, Leo. There was only a tiny, meticulously folded piece of cream-colored paper. She carefully unfolded it. The paper was soft and slightly worn at the creases, a silent testament to how many times it had been opened and closed. On it, written in her own neat, elegant script, was a single, stark piece of information. October 14th, 2022. The date he had sworn to her, with tears in his eyes, that he had ended the affair. The date he had begged for a second chance. The date she had granted it, all while knowing it was a lie. This was the day her war had truly begun. She stared at the date, her expression unchanging. This secret paper wasn't a source of pain anymore. It was a source of power, a reminder of her purpose. She folded it with precision, placed it back inside its silver sanctuary, and snapped the locket shut. The click echoed in the silent, cavernous room. She looked at her reflection one last time, a stranger in her own home, a queen on a throne of secrets. "It's time," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. Julian arrived at the meeting expecting tears or accusations about a broken heart. Instead, he faced a contract and the destruction of an entire legacy. He pushed through the heavy, sound-dampened doors of the Obsidian Bar at the Hotel Elysium, a place so discreet it felt like a secret whispered among the city's elite. The air was cool and smelled of expensive leather, aged whiskey, and the faint, sweet aroma of cigar smoke. Low, amber light glinted off crystal glasses, and the hushed murmur of conversation was the only soundtrack. It was a place for confessions and conspiracies, a fitting stage for whatever drama was about to unfold. And then he saw her. Serafina Dubois was seated in a plush, high-backed velvet armchair in a secluded corner, a single glass of deep red wine untouched before her. She wasn't the wild, carefree artist he remembered from Tuscany. This woman was a different creature entirely. She wore a tailored, razor-sharp black dress that seemed poured onto her frame, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her face, once a canvas of passionate emotion, was now a mask of cool, thus calculated composure. She looked less like a scorned lover and more like a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. As he approached, her eyes met his. There was no flicker of longing, no hint of nostalgia, only the glint of polished steel. "Julian," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble tabletop between them. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Thank you for coming." He sat, his own body feeling stiff and formal. "Serafina, your message said it was urgent." He tried to keep his tone firm, that of a man in control, but it came out sounding brittle. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "It is." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not here to rehash the past, Julian. I'm not here to talk about us." Relief, potent and immediate, washed over him. But it was fleeting, chased away by a new, more potent dread. If this wasn't about them, then what was it about? "Then what?" he pressed. Instead of answering, she reached down beside her chair and lifted a slim, expensive-looking leather briefcase, placing it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seemed to silence the entire bar. "I believe this belongs in your family's possession." He stared at the briefcase. It was old, the leather worn in places, the brass latches tarnished with age. It was his father's, Arthur Croft's. A cold knot formed in the pit of his stomach. "Where did you get that?" "A happy accident," she said airily, though there was nothing accidental in her gaze. "Let's just say some old storage units go up for auction. People leave things behind, things they think are buried forever." She nudged the briefcase towards him. "Open it." His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the latches. They clicked open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in his mind. He lifted the lid. There were no love letters, no compromising photos. It was worse. So much worse. The contents were a time capsule of a crime. Old, yellowing bank statements from defunct Swiss accounts, stacks of wire transfer receipts to offshore shell corporations. And at the very bottom, a set of incorporation documents for a company he'd never heard of, a company used to funnel money in a construction deal 2 decades ago. A deal that had been investigated and then mysteriously dropped. A deal that had laid the foundation for the Croft empire. And there, on the signature line of a key document, was the elegant, familiar scrawl of his father, Arthur Croft. The blood drained from Julian's face. He felt the air leave his lungs, the dimly lit bar suddenly tilting on its axis. This wasn't just a family scandal. This was the original sin. The secret buried at the heart of their legacy. A secret he had actively helped his father conceal after a junior partner threatened to go public years ago. A secret he thought had died with his father. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I believe the term is leverage," Serafina said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Your father was a very clever man, but not quite clever enough." She leaned forward, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "It's amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Enough to spark a federal investigation, enough to turn the name Croft from a symbol of success into a synonym for fraud. A legacy, Julian, is such a fragile thing, isn't it?" He felt the trap snap shut. The walls were closing in, and they were built from his own family's history. "What do you want, Serafina?" "Want?" She laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, Julian, want is such a small word. I have a vision, a brand to build. A fashion empire that will rival the likes of Chanel and Dior. Dubois. It will require capital, a significant investment to get started." She named a figure, a number so astronomical it made him physically flinch. It wasn't just money, it was a ransom. "You're blackmailing me?" he stated, the words flat and dead. "I'm offering you a business proposition," she corrected smoothly. "You invest in my future, and I, in turn, will forget all about your family's past. This briefcase and its contents will simply disappear forever. Consider it the price of keeping your precious legacy intact." She stood up, her silhouette a dark, elegant blade against the amber light. "You have my number. I'll expect to hear from you within 48 hours with a plan for the first transfer." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the ghosts of his father and the ticking time bomb that now sat on the table in front of him. The drive home was a dark, suffocating blur. The city lights smeared into meaningless streaks of neon. He was no longer Julian Croft, the titan of industry. He was a cornered animal, staring down the barrel of a gun he didn't know existed. The blackmail was one thing, a problem that money, however vast the sum, might solve. But it was the cold, calculated nature of it that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't the passionate, impulsive Serafina he had known. This was a stranger. A predator. He stumbled into the cavernous, silent penthouse just after midnight. The lights were low, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. He expected the space to be empty, but she was there. Eleonora. She was curled in a large armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a book resting unread in her lap as she gazed out at the glittering city below. She turned her head as he entered, her expression placid, unreadable. "Everything okay with the investors?" she asked, her voice calm and even. "Fine," he managed to say, the lie feeling clumsy and heavy. "We sorted it out." He walked towards the bar, needing a drink, needing something to numb the cold dread coiling in his gut. As he poured a whiskey, his eyes fell on her. He was looking for an anchor, a sign of normalcy in a world that had just been upended. And that's when he saw it. Or rather, what he didn't see. The The soft, delicate curve of her neck was bare. The silver locket was gone. His first gift to her, the one she never ever took off, the one that was supposed to be his North Star. Its absence was a gaping void, a statement louder than any scream, more damning than any accusation. It was a signal, a terrifying, silent declaration that the game had changed. He stared, the whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning on him. He had just walked out of one trap at the Hotel Elysium, only to come home and discover he was already caught in another. While Julian Croft spent the night battling the ghosts of his father's sins and his own betrayals, tossing and turning in a cold sweat, Eleanora Vance was quietly assembling an army. The dawn that broke over their silent penthouse was pale and gray, matching the icy atmosphere within. Julian was a phantom at the breakfast table, his eyes hollow, his movements jerky and uncertain. He mumbled something about an early board meeting and fled, leaving Eleanora in the cathedral-like silence of their home. She did not watch him go. Her focus was elsewhere. She walked to her personal study, a room of serene white and brushed steel that stood in stark contrast to Julian's dark, mahogany-paneled office. It was her command center. For years it had been the nerve center of her globally recognized philanthropic work, the Vance Foundation. Today it would be a war room. She sat at her glass desk and made a call from an encrypted line. The phone on the other end rang only once. Dubois. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and held a no-nonsense edge. "Miss Dubois, this is Eleanora Vance," Eleanora said, her own voice a calm, level counterpoint. "We spoke briefly last week regarding a potential matter." Mrs. Croft. "Yes, I remember," the private investigator, Isabelle Izzy Dubois, replied. "You said you might have a situation requiring absolute discretion." "The situation is no longer potential, it has become active," Eleanora stated, her gaze fixed on the cityscape outside her window. "I need comprehensive surveillance on 2 individuals. The first is my husband, Julian Croft. I want to know every meeting, every call, every transaction he makes that is outside the official scope of Croft and Thorne. Standard procedure." "And the second individual?" Izzy asked, a hint of digital scratching audible as she presumably took notes. Eleanora took a slow, steadying breath. "A woman named Serafina Dubois." A beat of silence. It was almost imperceptible. A fractional pause in the rhythm of the professional investigator. But Eleanora, a connoisseur of silences, noticed it immediately. The professional hum on the other end of the line was suddenly charged with something else. Something personal. When Izzy spoke again, her voice had a new, sharper timbre. A sliver of ice had entered her tone. "Serafina Dubois," she repeated, tasting the name. "I see. Well, Mrs. Croft, this just became a great deal more interesting." Izzy, the sharpest private eye in the city, was Serafina's estranged younger sister, a fact she kept well hidden, a fact born from a lifetime of resentment and a family schism that ran deeper than any ocean. A vendetta looking for a cause. "Consider it done. You'll have my first report by the end of the day." The call ended. Eleanora did not smile. She did not feel triumph. She felt only the cold, hard certainty of a general committing her troops to battle. This was not a move born of jealousy. It was a move of strategic necessity. She was not a scorned wife seeking proof of adultery. She was a CEO protecting her life's work and her son's future from the fallout of her husband's catastrophic failures. Her next call was to Evelyn Reed, her financial advisor for over a decade. Within the hour, Evelyn, a sharp woman with steel-gray hair and an even steelier gaze, was sitting opposite her in the study. Spread between them were documents detailing Eleanora's personal holdings, her inheritance, and, most importantly, the complex structure of the Vance Foundation. "I want a firewall," Eleanora said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "A complete and total separation of my assets and the Foundation's assets from anything connected to Julian Croft or his company. I want trusts established, holding companies created. I want it done by the end of the week. When this is over, Evelyn, I want to ensure that not a single cent can be touched, no matter what happens to him or his empire." Evelyn looked at her client, her friend, and saw not a woman on the verge of collapse, but one on the verge of a calculated offensive. "I understand completely," she said, already beginning to sort the documents into new piles. "We'll make it airtight. They won't be able to touch you." Meanwhile, across town in the glass and steel tower of Croft and Thorne, Julian was making his own desperate move. He was a man drowning, and Serafina had thrown him an anchor instead of a life raft. He sat before his computer, the glow of the screen illuminating the panic on his face. He created a shell company, a ghost in the corporate machine. He chose the name Ariadne Consulting, a bitter, ironic nod to the Greek myth of the labyrinth. He was the Minotaur, and he was paying for the thread to lead his own destroyer to safety. With a shaky hand, he executed the first wire transfer, a 7-figure sum. The money vanished from a discretionary fund and reappeared in an untraceable offshore account. Each click of the mouse felt like a betrayal of Eleonora, of his partners, of the very principles he claimed to uphold. But fear was a more powerful motivator than principle. The discrepancy didn't go unnoticed for long. Less than an hour later, Marcus Thorne, his partner and best man at his wedding, walked into his office without knocking. He held a single sheet of paper. "Julian, what the hell is this?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowed in a performance of deep concern. He placed the paper, a printout of the transaction, on Julian's desk. "Who is Ariadne Consulting? We just moved a staggering amount of capital to an unknown entity with no board approval. What's going on?" Julian felt a fresh wave of nausea. He tried to project an air of nonchalant authority. "It's a speculative side project, Marcus. High risk, potentially very high reward. I'm handling it personally." Marcus didn't buy it. He leaned forward, his hands on Julian's desk, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Julian, we've been friends for 25 years. We built this company from nothing. You can't lie to me. I know when something's wrong. You look like you haven't slept in a week. If you're in trouble, financial, personal, whatever it is, you can tell me. I can help. Don't shut me out." The offer of friendship, of help, was almost enough to make Julian break. He wanted to confess everything: the affair, the family scandal, the blackmail, to share the crushing weight of it all. But the shame was too great. How could he admit to the man who had stood by him at his wedding that he was on the verge of destroying everything, including the woman Marcus had introduced him to all those years ago? "I appreciate it, Marcus. I really do," Julian said, forcing a weary smile. "But it's under control. It's personal. I'll make it right." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his expression a perfect mask of worried friendship. But behind the mask, deep in his eyes, a different light was shining. It was the glint of calculation, the spark of opportunity. He saw a secret, and in their world, a secret was the most valuable currency of all. "All right, Julian," Marcus said, straightening up and patting his shoulder. "If you say so. But the offer stands. Anything you need." He walked out, closing the door softly behind him. Marcus went back to his own office, the picture of a concerned friend. But once the door was closed, the mask dropped. He sat at his desk, staring at the copy of the transaction he had made. The worry on his face was replaced by a slow, predatory smile. He didn't know the specifics of Julian's trouble. Not yet. But he knew it was big. He knew it was expensive. And he knew it was a weakness he could exploit. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his chin. If Julian wouldn't tell him what the secret was, maybe he could find a way to make it profitable for himself. Julian thought he had only one blackmailer. He was catastrophically wrong. He wasn't just being extorted, he was being hunted, and the predators were closing in from 3 sides. The notification arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious ping from his laptop. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and Julian was staring at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into meaningless patterns. He hadn't really slept since his meeting with Serafina. The encrypted email landed in his inbox like a drop of poison. The sender was an anonymous string of characters. The subject line contained only a single, ominous word: observation. His heart hammered against his ribs. With a trembling hand, he clicked it open. The body of the email was brutally simple. "She's not the only one you have to worry about. The price just went up. Double her ask. You have 24 hours to signal compliance. We'll be in touch with transfer details." It was the attachment, however, that made the blood freeze in his veins. He opened the file. It was a photograph, grainy and clearly taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. It was him and Serafina at the Hotel Elysium, him in the middle of handing her the leather briefcase containing his father's sins. The angle was from across the street, a phantom's eye view of his downfall. A raw, guttural sound escaped his lips. This was impossible. How? Who else could possibly know? His mind raced, paranoia taking root like a virulent weed. Was Serafina playing a more complex game than he imagined? Was she working with someone else, using a partner to double-dip to squeeze him from two different angles? The thought filled him with a white-hot rage. He didn't wait. He grabbed his keys and stormed out of the penthouse, driven by a fury that momentarily eclipsed his fear. He confronted her the next day, not in a discreet bar, but in the middle of a bustling public park, the manufactured cheerfulness of the place a grotesque backdrop for his unraveling. She was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons, looking almost normal, until she saw the look on his face. "Who else knows?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He shoved his phone in her face, the damning photograph glowing on the screen. "Who are you working with, Serafina? Was this the plan all along, to bleed me dry from every possible direction?" For the first time since her reappearance in his life, Serafina's mask of cool calculation shattered completely. She stared at the photo, her face paling, her eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated terror. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian, I have no idea. I swear to you, I'm not working with anyone." He wanted to disbelieve her, to cling to the simple explanation that she was the sole architect of his misery. But her fear was too real, too raw. The look in her eyes wasn't that of a co-conspirator caught in a lie. It was the look of someone who had just realized that the weapon she was holding was also aimed directly at her. She had lost control of her own blackmail. The secret was out, and it was no longer hers to manage. "If it's not you," Julian said, the rage draining out of him, replaced by a hollow, icy dread, "then who is it?" She just shook her head, speechless, a pawn in a game she thought she was commanding. The realization was horrifying for both of them. They were no longer just adversaries in a twisted negotiation. They were now fellow passengers on a sinking ship, chained together by a secret that was pulling them both into the abyss. While Julian's world was imploding in a chaotic spiral of encrypted emails and frantic confrontations, a different kind of storm was brewing in the unnerving quiet of the Croft penthouse. Leo Croft came home from university for a midterm break, expecting the familiar comfort of home. Instead, he walked into a gilded cage full of ghosts. The tension in the apartment was a physical presence, a low hum of anxiety that vibrated in the air. His parents, once a united force, were now two separate islands of misery, separated by a vast, silent ocean. His father was a ghost, a walking shell. He paced the length of the penthouse endlessly, a phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline, his eyes darting around as if expecting an attack at any moment. When Leo tried to talk to him, Julian's answers were clipped, distracted. His eyes were haunted, filled with a darkness Leo had never seen before. "Hey, Dad, thought we could maybe catch a game this weekend?" Leo had asked, trying to breach the wall. "Can't, Leo. Swamped with work," Julian had mumbled, not even looking up from his phone. This new deal, it's a killer. But it was his mother who worried him most. Eleonora, who had always been the warm, vibrant center of their family, had become a statue of terrifying calm. Her composure was flawless, her smile was perfect, but it never ever reached her eyes. She moved through the lavish rooms with a serene grace that felt completely at odds with the suffocating tension. It was the silence of a deep, frozen lake. You knew there were things moving in the dark depths, but the surface was perfectly, unnervingly still. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Leo asked her one evening as she stared out at the city lights. "Things feel weird. Dad seems like he's on another planet." Eleonora turned to him and gave him one of her perfectly polished, empty smiles. She brushed a hand through his hair. "Don't you worry about a thing, darling. It's just business. You know how your father gets when he's closing a major deal. Focus on your studies. That's all that matters." Her tone was light, reassuring, but her eyes conveyed a different message entirely. They told him not to ask any more questions. The polite evasions, the hollow smiles, the terrifying silence, it all painted a picture of a family quietly coming apart at the seams. And Leo was stuck in the middle, a helpless spectator to a slow-motion catastrophe he couldn't understand. He didn't know, of course, that the second predator hunting his father was the man he'd always called Uncle Marcus. In his sleek office at Crofton Thorne, Marcus Thorne reviewed the surveillance photo he'd anonymously emailed to Julian. He had hired his own investigator the moment Julian had rebuffed his offer of help. The picture was his opening salvo. His plan was simple and brutal: push Julian from the shadows, apply relentless, anonymous pressure, force him into a mistake, a panicked, illegal transfer, a public outburst, anything that would give the board of directors no choice but to oust him. And who would be there to steady the ship, to take the reins of the empire? The loyal partner, the best friend. Marcus smiled. It was the perfect trap. Julian was now ensnared in a perfect three-pronged cage. On one side, Serafina, the emotional, unpredictable blackmailer whose own scheme had spiraled out of her control. On the other, Marcus, the cold, calculating corporate predator, the best friend, orchestrating a betrayal of breathtaking cruelty. And surrounding them all was the most terrifying force of all: Eleonora's silent, watchful, all-knowing presence. He was being squeezed from every conceivable angle, his desperation mounting with every passing hour. He was out of options, out of time, and completely, utterly alone. That night, Leo couldn't sleep. The oppressive silence of the penthouse felt louder than any argument. He crept out of his room, needing a glass of water, needing to escape the feeling that the walls were closing in. As he passed his father's study, he saw a sliver of light from under the door. He heard the clink of a glass against a decanter, and then the soft, muffled sound of his father's pacing, back and forth, like a caged lion. Leo stood there in the darkness of the hallway, a profound sense of dread washing over him. This wasn't just work pressure. This was something else, something that was hollowing out his father from the inside. Something that was freezing his mother into a porcelain doll. And in that moment, Leo knew he couldn't just be a spectator anymore. He had to find out what was destroying his family before there was nothing left to save. The final weapon in the war for the Croft legacy wasn't a gun or a threat. It wasn't forged in steel or written on expensive legal stationery. It was a small, cold piece of plastic and metal, a flash drive in the hands of a heartbroken son. Leo waited in the darkness of the hallway, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, until the pacing in his father's study finally ceased. He heard the exhausted sigh, the final clink of the whiskey decanter, and the heavy, unsteady footsteps retreating to the master bedroom. The house fell into its now familiar, oppressive silence, a silence that screamed. Driven by a gnawing anxiety that had become a physical ache in his chest, Leo slipped into the study. The room, usually a monument to order and control, was in disarray. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat sweating on the polished mahogany desk, leaving a faint ring. Stacks of financial reports were pushed aside, some spilling onto the floor. It was the den of a desperate man. Leo's eyes scanned the room, not sure what he was even looking for. A clue. An answer. Anything to explain the poison that was seeping through the walls of his home. His search was fruitless at first. Drawers filled with old business cards, custom monogrammed pens, the mundane artifacts of his father's success. Then he saw it. Tucked carelessly beneath a leather-bound legal pad was a slim, unassuming envelope. It was blank, except for two initials scrawled in a hasty, sharp script. St. Serafina de Bois. The name echoed in his memory, a half-forgotten whisper from a furious, muffled argument he had overheard years ago. A name he wasn't supposed to know. With a surge of dread and irresistible curiosity, he picked up the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but the small, black flash drive. He hesitated for only a second before pocketing it. This felt wrong, a violation, but the need to understand was stronger than his sense of propriety. Back in the sanctuary of his own room, the door locked. He plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The air grew still, the only sound the soft whir of the machine. A single, unlabeled folder appeared on his screen. He clicked it open, and his world shattered. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. It was a digital tapestry of deceit, woven with hundreds of files. He opened the emails first. Tense, angry exchanges with Serafina, not about love, but about promises and obligations. Then he found the wire transfers, a steady stream of money flowing from a vaguely named shell company, Ariadne Consulting, to an offshore account. He saw the hotel receipts, The travel logs for trips Julian had claimed were business-related. But that was only the surface. He dug deeper, into subfolders protected by simple passwords he guessed easily. His own birthday, his mother's maiden name. And there it was, the real rot, the secret at the foundation of their family. He saw the scanned documents detailing the family scandal, the one involving his grandfather, Arthur Croft. He didn't understand all the dense legal language, the talk of subsidiaries and fraudulent conveyances, but he understood enough. He saw the threats from Serafina, her demands growing more explicit. He saw the evidence of a life built on a carefully constructed lie. This was more than an affair. So much more. This was blackmail. This was a crime. This was the complete and utter demolition of the man he had idolized his entire life. Leo leaned back in his chair, a cold, sick feeling churning in his stomach. The man who had taught him how to throw a baseball, who had given him his first speech about integrity, who had stood as a titan of industry and a pillar of honor in his mind, that man was gone. He had been replaced by this stranger on the screen, a weak, cornered man paying hush money to cover up not only his own sins, but the sins of his father. The marble statue had a crack running through it, and now Leo could see that it was hollow inside. It had always been hollow. What do I do? The question screamed in his head. What am I supposed to do with this? For days, he was paralyzed by the weight of the evidence. The flash drive felt like a radioactive stone in his pocket. He was adrift in a sea of moral ambiguity. He couldn't confront his father. Julian was already a caged animal, defensive and paranoid. A confrontation would only be met with more lies, more anger. And his mother? How could he possibly show this to her? In his mind, she was the one holding the family together, with her quiet, fragile grace. He saw her as a porcelain doll, and he was terrified that this truth, this ugly, brutal evidence, would be the blow that shattered her into a million pieces. His loyalty was torn. Did he protect the memory of the father he once knew, the hero of his childhood? Or did he have a duty to his mother, the silent, suffering party in this slow-motion disaster? The answer came to him a few days later. He was passing his mother's study when he saw her through the open door. She wasn't the fragile porcelain doll he had imagined. She was on the phone, speaking in a low, firm voice to, he assumed, one of her lawyers. Her back was straight. Her expression was one of intense, steely focus. There was no fragility there. There was no weakness. There was only strength. A quiet, formidable strength that he had mistaken for sadness. In that moment he understood. His mother wasn't the one who needed protecting. Her silence wasn't the silence of submission, it was the silence of strategy. She was not a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a general surveying the battlefield. His father wasn't just a man making mistakes. He was the source of the rot threatening to consume them all. And his mother was the only one strong enough to stop it. His decision was made. His loyalty was no longer divided. That evening, he walked into his parents' bedroom. It was empty. He went to his mother's vanity, the polished wood cool beneath his fingertips. He took out the flash drive and a small note card. With a steady hand, he wrote 3 simple words. I think you need this. He placed the flash drive and the note in the center of the vanity, a stark modern offering on a traditional altar of intimacy. He didn't wait for her to find it. He didn't linger. He simply turned and walked away. A terrible weight lifted from his shoulders, replaced by a somber certainty. Later, Eleonora entered the room. She saw the objects on her vanity immediately. She read the note, her expression unchanging. Then she picked up the flash drive. She held the small black object in the palm of her hand. It felt heavy. Heavy with lies, with betrayal, with the final, undeniable proof she needed. She looked towards the door where her son had just been, and for the first time in weeks, a flicker of raw emotion crossed her face. It was not triumph. It was a deep, aching pain, mingled with a fierce, pained pride. He had chosen. He had chosen her. She closed her hand around the drive, the hard plastic edges digging into her skin. The last piece of her arsenal was now in place. The storm her husband had so desperately feared was finally here. But she would be the one to direct the lightning. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Eleonora Vance, holding the sum of her husband's sins in the palm of her hand, was about to serve it in a devastating ice storm. The storm her husband had feared was finally here. But she would be the one to direct the lightning. Her final gambit was not a single, furious act of retribution, but a chess master's elegant two-move checkmate. She did not act with the heated passion of a wronged lover. She moved with the cold, precise strategy of a CEO executing a flawless corporate takedown. The first move came at dawn. From a sterile, untraceable laptop in a location no one could ever link to her, she composed an anonymous, encrypted email. The recipient was the head of the legal department at Croft & Thorne. The attachment was small but potent, only the records pertaining to the Ariadne Consulting shell company and the recent frantic wire transfers Julian had made. She included no context, no explanation, just the raw data. The evidence of embezzlement. She hit send and closed the laptop. The effect was exactly as she had predicted. It was a surgical strike designed not to demolish the company outright, but to create chaos and force the board's hand. Panic erupted in the hallowed halls of Croft & Thorne. An emergency board meeting was called. Julian, cornered and unable to explain the illicit transfer without revealing the blackmail, was swiftly and decisively forced to take an indefinite leave of absence. And into the power vacuum stepped Marcus Thorne. He played his part to perfection, feigning reluctance and a heavy heart as he accepted the role of interim CEO. He promised the board he would lead a thorough internal investigation to get to the bottom of his best friend's shocking lapse in judgment. He sat in Julian's chair, behind Julian's desk, and savored a victory he believed he had engineered. He was the king. But he was a king on a throne of glass, and Eleonora was about to throw the final stone. A week later, Marcus firmly established and basking in the glow of his newfound power, the second move was made. This time, the email was sent to a single recipient, a famously relentless investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, a woman Eleonora's team had vetted for months. The email was, again, anonymous and brief, but this time the attachment was a link to a secure, cloud-based server. A digital vault. Inside was everything. The entire contents of the flash drive, the emails between Julian and Serafina, the details of the blackmail, the evidence of Arthur Croft's original financial sins that had built the family legacy, and most devastatingly, the complete digital trail of the second blackmailer, Marcus Thorne. His encrypted emails to Julian, the surveillance photo he had used as leverage, his own offshore accounts. It was all there, a perfect, undeniable narrative of greed, betrayal, and corruption, implicating not just the fallen CEO, but the new one as well. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a ripple, it was a tsunami. The headline was brutal. The House of Croft, a legacy of lies. The article was a masterclass in investigative journalism, laying out the sordid tale of a family empire built on fraud, sustained by blackmail, and ultimately destroyed by the backstabbing of its two leaders. The collapse was instantaneous and absolute. Trading of Croft & Thorne stock was halted within minutes, but it was already too late. The company's value had evaporated. The brand was toxic. Julian Croft, the disgraced titan, and Marcus Thorne, the usurper exposed as a common extortionist, were both professionally and personally annihilated in a single, devastating news cycle. The empire they had fought over was now nothing but a smoking crater. The final scene of the war did not take place in the cold, opulent penthouse that had become a prison. It unfolded in a new apartment, high above the city, a space filled not with heavy antiques and dark memories, but with clean lines, minimalist furniture, and an abundance of natural light. Eleonora sat on a simple white sofa, a cup of tea steaming gently in her hands. Beside her, Leo watched the news report on a large screen, his expression somber, but no longer lost. He wasn't watching a family tragedy anymore. He was watching the logical conclusion of a long and painful equation. He looked at his mother, at her calm, composed profile, and for the first time he fully understood the difference between weakness and quiet strength. As the news anchor announced the formal dissolution of Croft & Thorne, Eleonora calmly placed her teacup down. She reached up and unclasped the silver locket from around her neck. With steady fingers, she opened it. She removed the small, worn piece of paper, the one bearing the date of Julian's hollow promise. She didn't rip it or burn it. She simply folded it one last time and set it aside, an artifact of a life that was now over. Then she picked up a pen and a fresh slip of paper. She wrote down that day's date, the first day of her new beginning. She folded the new paper, placed it inside the locket, and clicked it shut with a soft final sound. She had won. Not by raising her voice, not by shedding a public tear, but by playing the game better than anyone else. Her silent victory was absolute. Her revenge had been served. It wasn't a fiery, passionate affair. It was cold, clean, and perfect. The justice of an empress. Her silence had never been an absence of words. It had been the drawing of a deep, steady breath before the storm. So that's how the story ends, our dear friends. And if you're still here, still watching, then maybe, just maybe, something in this tale reached into your heart and stirred something. Maybe it wasn't just about betrayal or revenge or even power. Maybe it was about something far deeper. Something we often forget in our own lives. Silence is never just silence. Eleonora didn't scream. She didn't destroy things. She didn't beg or cry. Instead, she chose clarity, discipline, stillness. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. That was her code. Her quiet became her strength. This wasn't just a war between a husband and wife. It was a lesson in grace under pressure, in protecting what truly matters, our values, our children, our legacy. It's a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits at a desk, builds a firewall, makes the right calls, and waits for the moment that justice serves itself. Julian built an empire on lies. Eleonora dismantled it with silence. But this isn't about cheering on a takedown. It's about understanding that truth will always outlast deceit. That character isn't revealed when we succeed. It's revealed when we're betrayed. And that our children, like Leo, are always watching, learning, choosing what kind of person they will become. So if you're still here, maybe ask yourself, what kind of legacy are you building? And if it crumbled tomorrow, would it be built on truth or illusion? Thank you for staying with us to the very end. If this story moved you, if it made you think, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel. We tell stories not just to entertain, but to heal, to reflect, and to grow. And maybe to remind each other that silence can be the loudest answer of all.